Welcome to Rare Coins Hub, your ultimate destination for rare coins, numismatic treasures, and hidden coin values. Discover history, mystery, and money in every coin. Subscribe and explore. It was the early 1980s. The world was spinning into a new decade with big hair, bold fashion, and a soundtrack of synthesizers and rock ballads. In the United States, economic pressures loomed in the wake of inflation, and people were starting to feel the effects in grocery stores, gas stations, and in their pockets, literally. Coins, once dismissed as spare change, began to catch more eyes. Not because of their purchasing power, but because of what they represented. History, craftsmanship, and, occasionally, mystery. Amid this environment, the Denver Mint continued its steady march of production. Machines roared to life daily, turning metal blanks into Roosevelt dimes by the millions. It was routine, fast, efficient, yet somehow, amid all this mechanized perfection, something special happened in 1982. A tiny coin, only 10 cents in face value, would quietly be born with the kind of characteristics that collectors dream of. That dime, struck in the Denver Mint, bore the date 1982 and a little D mark, unassuming at first glance. To most Americans, it was a standard coin, indistinguishable from countless others. It jingled in jean pockets, dropped into vending machines, and rolled under couch cushions. But to a trained eye, or a lucky one, it held secrets waiting to be discovered. This particular year was one of transition. The Mint had made subtle changes to the inscriptions, die varieties, and in the mix of the metals themselves. Small differences that seemed irrelevant to everyday life. But to those who knew how to look, they meant everything. It was a year when certain dimes were struck with distinct clarity. Some showed strong die features. Others had planchet errors or extremely high-quality strikes from early die states. But what set a handful of these coins apart, what would eventually place them in a league of their own, was the way they seemed almost too perfect, too clean. As if they'd been struck not just for circulation, but with a silent nod to excellence. In the sleepy town of Silverton, Colorado, a young history teacher named Diane Harper was flipping through pocket change while preparing a lesson on American economics. She liked showing her students real coins to connect lessons to reality. But as she laid out a series of dimes on her desk, one of them caught the light in a curious way. She leaned in, curious. The shine was brighter, the lines on Roosevelt's face more defined. She turned it over. The torch, olive branch, and oak branch stood out sharply. Every detail was crisp, almost sculptural. She slipped it into a small protective case. She had no idea what she just found, but she knew it was different. Across the country, stories like Diane's began to surface. Collectors, dealers, and even casual coin roll hunters stumbled upon 1982 D dimes that seemed just a little too pristine. Not just high-quality strikes, but coins that seemed to whisper their rarity. Coins that hadn't been scraped through the years or dulled by time. Coins that defied expectation. Numismatists began to dig deeper. They pored over mint records, comparing die rotations, planchet compositions, and striking pressures. They discussed doubled dies, full torch bands, and polished finishes in hushed tones at coin shows. The 1982 D dime wasn't rare in the traditional sense. Millions were produced. But rarity, in this case, came down to condition and detail. It came down to subtle, microscopic differences that only the most dedicated could see, and only the luckiest could find. These weren't errors, but exceptional survivors. Coins that had dodged wear and tear. Coins that had been spared the slow erosion of time. And then came the turning point. A coin collector from Nevada named Harris Geller uncovered a 1982 D dime in a forgotten envelope, tucked inside his grandfather's belongings. The coin was radiant, practically glowing under the lamplight. When he magnified it, he gasped. The bands on the reverse were fully intact, unbroken, perfectly struck. The face of Roosevelt was flawless. The coin had the hallmarks of a first strike, possibly from a newly polished die. It was, in every respect, a masterpiece. That single coin became a catalyst. Discussions lit up online forums. Collectors began to pay closer attention. Dealers started inspecting their inventory with renewed focus. The hunt for the most exceptional 1982 D dime was on. Each rediscovered coin brought its own story. A coin taped into a child's scrapbook as a keepsake. Another tucked into the spine of a photo album. One even showed up in a small-town hardware store's change drawer, untouched for decades. These coins, hidden in the ordinary, carried with them the quiet power of history. Now, all these years later, the 1982 D dime has earned its place among the most revered Roosevelt dimes in modern history. And though the average example may be worth only its face value, the finest specimens, the ones with immaculate luster, full torch bands, and flawless fields, have transformed into treasures. One such coin, preserved like a time capsule, now stands as a shining example of what can happen when timing, care, and fate align. Its value, measured not just in money but in rarity, story, and numismatic beauty, reaches a breathtaking $170,000. The year was 1983, and the United States stood at the intersection of technological advancement and economic challenge. Across the nation, people balanced hope for innovation with the practical strains of a recovering economy. Ronald Reagan was in the White House. Inflation was easing but still palpable, and amidst the swirl of national headlines, one of the smallest players in the U.S. economy quietly emerged, the humble one-dime coin, minted in Philadelphia, marked with a subtle yet significant P. The 1983 one-dime coin was born into a world that didn't immediately notice it. After all, a dime was just a dime. Light, thin, and often ignored at the bottom of pockets or sliding under vending machines. But not every dime is created equal. And some carry with them a legacy that only time, patience, and a curious eye can uncover. The Philadelphia Mint was humming with activity in 1983. The presses roared as blank planchets were fed into the coining chambers. Sparks of friction, the hiss of moving parts, and the rhythmic thud of dies striking metal filled the air. Within this industrial ballet, the Roosevelt dime, bearing the familiar profile of the 32nd president on its obverse, was reproduced millions of times. Yet amid the millions, a few coins defied the ordinary. One such coin, a 1983 P dime, emerged with an uncanny perfection. The fields around Roosevelt's portrait were cleaner, brighter. The details of his hair and cheekbone were more defined than usual. The rim was evenly struck, bold yet balanced. On the reverse, the iconic torch with its olive and oak branches flared with remarkable sharpness. The vertical and horizontal lines within the torch bands were crisp, deeply impressed, forming what collectors call a full band strike, an elusive trait that signals not just quality but rarity. The die that struck this dime must have been fresh, finely polished, and properly aligned. And the planchet itself, possibly a high-quality blank, received the impression with near-flawless fidelity. It's this combination of precision, preservation, and fortune that makes certain 1983 P dimes stand out in the numismatic world. But the story doesn't end with a minting anomaly. These coins didn't go directly to collectors. They entered circulation. They bought coffee, paid tolls, rattled in cash drawers. Years passed. Most wore down, lost their luster, and disappeared into the sea of common coinage. Yet a select few remained in pristine condition, tucked away in forgotten drawers, coin jars, and sealed mint sets. Collectors began to take notice. The search began, not for error coins, but for excellence. Enthusiasts combed through rolls, attended local coin shows, examined mint sets under magnification. The excitement wasn't about what was wrong with the coin, it was about what was right. Perfectly right. The kind of right that could only be achieved by chance and machinery in rare harmony. Stories started to surface. A retired machinist in Ohio discovered one inside an old dresser drawer he hadn't opened since the 80s. A teenager in Arizona found another in a collection inherited from her grandfather. Each new discovery added fuel to the growing fascination. Forums buzzed, coin shops fielded inquiries, and grading companies started to see more 1983 P dimes submitted for evaluation. Still, the majority didn't make the cut. Too many bore faint scratches, contact marks, or signs of wear. Only the rarest, those untouched by time and circulation, earned the highest grades and accolades. And from this select tier emerged one coin, unmatched in brilliance. A dime that shimmered with untouched luster, its details pristine, its story captivating. Over time, this particular 1983p dime would come to represent the pinnacle of Roosevelt dime collecting. Not because of any minting error, but because of its sheer perfection. The die alignment, the pressure of the strike, the quality of the planchet, and the fortunate preservation combined to create something far greater than the sum of its parts. Today, that coin is known among elite collectors. It's discussed in quiet tones at major coin gatherings. It has become a symbol of what happens when common metal meets uncommon fate. And while it began as just 10 cents, the value of this 1983p one-dime coin has reached an astonishing $180,000. The year was 1984. A year etched in American consciousness for many reasons. George Orwell's dystopian novel had stirred imaginations decades before, and now, the year itself had arrived. But reality was far from the gray world of telescreens and thought police. The United States, bold and booming, was alive with energy. The Summer Olympics dazzled in Los Angeles. Compact discs began replacing cassette tapes. The Space Shuttle Discovery launched its maiden voyage. And within the clatter and clang of the Philadelphia Mint, a small piece of metal was about to begin a journey that would defy all expectations. No one paid attention to it at the time. Why would they? It was just a dime. 10 cents. Light, ordinary, and one of hundreds of millions being pressed that year. It didn't stand out. It didn't gleam like gold or shimmer with silver. It wasn't born to sparkle. It was born to serve. To pass from hand to hand, unnoticed. Tucked into pockets, dropped in tip jars, slid into parking meters. But this one, this single 1984 dime minted in Philadelphia, would not follow that path. Somewhere inside the cavernous walls of the minting facility, as thousands of coin blanks rolled across conveyor belts, a single die struck metal with uncommon precision. A Roosevelt profile came to life, not soft or blurred, but crisp, like the sculptor's chisel had whispered across the die only moments before. On the reverse, the torch flared with sharp flames, framed by olive and oak branches that seemed to curl with quiet motion. Every letter, every ridge of the reeded edge, every microscopic detail, perfect. As if the coin had been preserved by fate itself. But fate works in strange ways. That dime didn't land in a collector's glove. It didn't slide into a display case. It slipped into the world like all the others. Forgotten. Unseen. Until decades later, it would resurface in a story so unlikely, even the most seasoned numismatists would raise their eyebrows. In a quiet town along the Pennsylvania border, a retired librarian named Walter Kent was cleaning out boxes from his late brother's attic. Dusty folders, old tax documents, VHS tapes, nothing of value. Until he found a red envelope with a rubber band wrapped 3 times around its center. Inside, a handful of coins old and new. And among them, a 1984 dime that shone brighter than the rest. Walter, who had cataloged books for 40 years, knew the importance of detail. Something about this dime felt deliberate, different. The edges were sharper. The luster hadn't dulled. The torch bands, fully struck. As if the coin had never met the world. He didn't know it yet, but what he held was more than just a pocket change curiosity. It was a treasure in disguise. Back in 1984, Philadelphia's mint was bustling. It was a year of massive production. Over 1 billion dimes rolled off the presses. In those numbers, the chances of finding a coin of extraordinary quality seemed nearly impossible. But that's the allure. Buried in the chaos, a few diamonds emerge. Coins that beat the odds, not through error, but through excellence. The Roosevelt dime design, introduced in 1946, had by 1984 become part of America's daily rhythm. Franklin D. Roosevelt's profile stood proudly on the obverse, his legacy linked forever with the March of Dimes and the fight against polio. But with each passing year, dies wore out faster, details faded, and striking quality varied. Only a small percentage, struck early in a die's life with perfect alignment and flawless blanks, came out in peak condition. Most were spent, degraded by circulation. But a very few, found a way to remain untouched, unblemished. Like the one in Walter's envelope, news of his discovery began to ripple quietly through collector circles. Emails were exchanged. Photographs analyzed under magnification. The sharpness of the strike, the evenness of the fields, the depth of Roosevelt's hairlines, and the strength of the torch's vertical and horizontal bands. All signs pointed to something rare, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. In numismatics, perfection is often harder to find than flawed. It wasn't long before other 1984p dimes began to attract attention. Not all were the same, many had worn edges, grease-filled dies, or weak strikes, but a handful shared that same almost surreal clarity. Those coins sparked a hunt across the country. People began digging through old change jars, childhood coin folders, and estate sales with new eyes. In upstate New York, a high school student stumbled upon a similar dime while helping his grandmother sort a jar of coins. In Southern California, a janitor found one while cleaning under vending machines. The stories poured in, each coin with its own path, its own miracle of preservation. Experts began to trace the patterns. They looked at minting shifts, machine maintenance logs, even the types of planchets used in early 1984. They discovered that some of the clearest strikes came from the first batches minted in January, before the dies began to wear. They theorized that a small batch of planchets, highly polished, perfectly shaped, had slipped into the process. Perhaps it was intentional, perhaps accidental. Either way, it resulted in coins that now held value far beyond their 10-cent label. Collectors, by nature, chase the rare. But they also chase the beautiful. And the most beautiful 1984p dimes possess an almost artistic brilliance. Coins that seem frozen in time, untouched by wear, whispering the story of a minting moment captured forever. Years passed. Coins came and went. Markets shifted. But the legend of the perfect 1984p dime only grew. It wasn't just about money. It was about the wonder of discovery. The thrill of realizing that something ordinary could, under the right conditions, become extraordinary. And then, quietly, a moment arrived. One of these dimes, flawless, lustrous, full bands blazing, was recognized not only as the best known of its kind, but as a numismatic marvel. Its details unmatched. Its preservation unthinkable. A coin that transcended its metal and its era. Today, that one shining dime stands among the most valuable of all Roosevelt-era pieces. Its tale, built on silence and survival, now echoes across collector forums, whispered at coin shows, cherished in private collections. And its value, once just 10 cents, has risen to a staggering $170,000.